Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you all for coming this evening. I know, having met you on the front door, that for some of you this is your first visit to Nature and Art. So if that's the case, a special welcome to you. We have gatherings like this pretty well every month. So if you feel inspired, which I'm sure you will as a result of coming today, have a look on our website and see what other evenings and exhibitions and so on are coming up. We'd love to see you again. When we gather of an evening, we always like to come and sit down and have our inspirational batteries boosted, hopefully learn some things, because we're all on a journey wanting to experience art and nature in all its diversity, and occasions like this can just help us do that. It's been wonderful having Fiona's exhibition and working with Fiona. Somebody said to me quite recently, I like Nature and Art because you're always the same, which I was a bit disappointed by. Quickly followed up by, but you're always different. And I like that. We're always the same, but always different. So should you come again, Fiona's pictures might not be here, or if you come next week, even some of the things upstairs will be different. We're a collection that at the moment collects to show things, rather than to collect just for collecting's sake. I'm sure one day we will be doing that, but at the moment we're collecting to show things. So Monday, which is our day closed, isn't our day off. It's the best day when we can hang exhibitions like Fiona's or change items from our collection, which we'll be doing this Monday. So there we are. So I'd love to, you probably know Fiona, all of you anyway, so I'd like you to give Fiona a rapturous welcome. Because Fiona, you're the reason for us being here tonight. And then Fiona's going to introduce Christiana and Nicola to us as well. So can we give them a welcome as well?
Well, first I'd like to thank everybody here for turning up. I'm absolutely overwhelmed, to be honest. And as you know, the exhibition is more than an exhibition of work, it's also a book. And if it wasn't for Christiana and Nicola, the book would be just half as interesting. But we've also got some other fantastic contributors here. So we've got Stanislav Schmeller. Stand up. Stanislav contributed to the wonderful piece on the back jacket of the book, and he's involved in environmental, how would you describe it?
Sustainability work, consultancy for the UN, teaching the new generations about how to make the world a better place.
Right. And then we also have Anthony Adol, who's a broadcaster and has written lots of books on ancient history. You want to just explain your contribution?
Well, I wrote a book years and years ago, but I'm a genealogist, and I get very frustrated that you can't go as far back as you want up family lines. So I started to get interested in the bits of early humanity that you can still find around the world. And I started, with my husband Scott and I started visiting stone circles and things like that, because that was a way of getting in touch with the earlier ancestors who you can't reach by what I do. My work is limited. And with the Galician petroglyphs, I thought it was so interesting, so fascinating, you could see actual little stick people and their animals and the symbols they carved. And you could really get close to these people who are connected to us, and we're probably just even descended from them. And that was years ago. And then I moved on, I'm doing other things, and then suddenly Fiona contacted me and said, well, what about these petroglyphs? And it's lovely to remember all these journeys you made and all the places you went, and then to see them again recreated in your book. So that's why I'm here. So,
So there are two other people Iceland, Fanny Ingvadottir, and she's the executive director of Arctic Portal. But she sends her best wishes, and she's written the chapter heading for basically glacial melting, which is a major problem in Iceland, but also around the world at the moment. Also James Sayer, who is an expert on remnant pines, or the Caledonian pines of Scotland, and she's written a fabulous piece for the Scottish section of the book. And also, I have had 66 supporters backing this project, the book and the exhibition, without whom I would not have been able to realise this project at all. And there are so many people, it's difficult to thank them all, but some of them are here, and they know who they are. And that includes every member of my own family, the McIntyres. So I'm extremely... And I'll just make a quick... I don't know how much time I've got, actually. How much time have I got left?
You'll find out.
I just wanted to briefly talk about the journey that has brought me here. It's been a very long journey. It's been arduous. I've had pitfalls along the way. I've had disappointments, and something nevertheless kept sort of pushing me on. And it all started in 1993 when I came back from living abroad in Sweden and Spain. And so I've been abroad, I guess, for about 8 years in total. And it was quite a journey of learning to function in different countries, learning the languages, all that entails, which can be quite challenging and also incredibly rewarding. So I learnt a lot about myself, actually. So when I finally came back to the United Kingdom, I went about improving my English vocabulary by writing a poem, which is in the book. It's called Sacred Earth, and that's what spawned the whole exhibition idea. And the concept behind it, really, I guess, is this idea that languages evolve out of nature, actually. I know a lot of things have been written about that. And that's also part of our oral tradition, it's part of our musical traditions. It's this idea that sounds of languages somehow mimicking natural things like birdsong, the sound of water, of the sound of the wind in the trees, and various animals. So that all fed into the poem. And that in itself also then fed into the artwork. And there's another thing that links it all together, and that is the pigments. And that was another massive long journey for me, which there isn't enough time really to explain it all. But the pigments are like a sort of tapestry of threads, if you like, because they're of the landscapes, they're mineral rocks and clays, they're the actual substance of this planet, and they tell their own stories. And they also, when they're transformed in a form of alchemy, which has been practiced for many years, they become something very beautiful. They turn into paint, and then they turn into art. So there's something very beautiful about that, something very poetic, this idea that you can transform the literal stuff of the planet into artworks, which then speak to people, communicate to people. And then that takes us back to what Anthony was saying with the ancient Galician petroglyphs, and also petroglyphs around the world, where we began to be we were respectful of nature because we were deeply ensconced in it. We started to inscribe symbols on the rocks and paint on the caves, even you can trace it back 100,000 years, which is pretty extraordinary. And that's when the very first ochre remnants or paint making equipment was found in caves in South Africa. So I hope that you see in the exhibition a link that takes us on a massive journey all the way back into our distant past and has brought us here and has an ecological, very important message attached. So over to you.
Okay, well, I thought I'd say something about what I respond to in Fiona's art, I guess, you know, what really grips me about it. So I first came across her work in 2013 when I went to an exhibition called Under the Greenwood, which was the first exhibition of the arborealists, who are artists who work on trees. And Tim Craven organised that exhibition, and he's just told me that they're now having their 45th exhibition. That really be so. So it's been tremendously successful. And I myself have written a book on trees in 18th and 19th century British art. So of course I was drawn to that. I think in 2013 I was just starting to work on that. And so I find your paintings and drawings of the Dundregan pines particularly appealing, because I think the trees that you draw have so much character and personality, and they have so much movement as well, and they look as if they have spirits. And the sort of artists I've been working on in the 18th and 19th centuries also felt that trees had personality, trees had spirits. So that really resonates with me. And then artists I've studied in the past also have been so dedicated to working out of doors that they've gone and sat in the rain and caught cold. I love there's a photograph of Fiona in the book where she's sitting under a tarpaulin painting a Scotch pine and really well wrapped up against the cold. And I think that's really heroic. I like the way you're looking back to Greek mythology and you know so much about the myths. I mean, Fiona's also a very well-read artist, as are some of the artists I've worked on in the past, like Samuel Palmer, for instance, my favourite. And yet at the same time, Fiona's work's very modern because she's really aware of ecology and the dangers to the species. And then I suppose another thing about the trees is that lots of studies have shown that being in and amongst trees and looking at trees, and I'm sure drawing trees, has a huge effect on human well-being. So I think that, for me, I think just looking at one of those drawings, paintings, has the same sort of effect. So those are the trees. Then Fiona's talked about how her early memories of growing up in Scotland have affected her approach. And I actually grew up in Avebury, so I grew up with the ancient stone circle. And so looking at although I haven't been to Galicia, but looking at the paintings of the petroglyphs just reminds me of that sense of being in an ancient landscape. And although Avebury itself, there's a village in the middle of the circle, if you go up on the downs above Avebury, you can stand in a place where you can't see any, you can see signs of human intervention in the landscape. For sure, you can see fields and so on, but you can't see any houses or buildings. And you can just imagine being there back in the distant past and kind of, I think Fiona's got a sort of sixth sense for listening to the ancestral voices, the whisperings of the wind, and you can feel that there's something in the air. And another thing I found fascinating about that is the way you get, in many cultures and also in some indigenous peoples today, you get very similar ideas, like the idea of the spiral being a portal to another world. So that sense of the windswept, remote countryside I find very appealing too. And then the Iceland pictures. I've never been to Iceland either. So I suppose that fascinates me because it's so different. But I love those cool colour schemes, you know, the blues and the greens and the whites, and the way, the big paintings, you can stand back from them, and the perspective is just perfect, it all falls into place. But what I also would like to draw your attention to is there are 9 little prints on blocks, which I think you made from leftover pigments.
Yes.
And you just sort of got random effects. And yet the random effects that came out were shapes that you had seen in the ice.
Yeah.
So what's happening there? It is a sort of magic, isn't it? But it's so Fiona's art isn't just based on her being in the landscape and looking at what's in front of her and trying to transcribe that. It's also the memory of what you've seen, and then magic. It must be. And of course the glaciers too are threatened by climate change, as you say, they're melting. But when you look at the Icelandic paintings, and one of them is called Relics of the Ice Age, isn't it? You can feel you're back in a time when, not before mankind, but before mankind, womankind, peoplekind, humankind, okay, started messing up with the earth, basically. And so that's inspiring as well. Then I like the structure of the exhibition. I did curated 4 exhibitions at the IWA in Bristol in the last sort of decade or so, which were on earth, air, fire and water, the 4 elements. But for Fiona, the idea of the magic number of 3, and the rocks and the water and the trees, works very well. 3 is such a symbolic number in so many different contexts. But also you've got, as you say, the basic matter of the earth, and you don't just depict it, you actually paint with it as well. And then the water, which is the basic building block of all life, and then the trees, which are the most important of the vegetables that we share our planet with. And then I love landscape painting, and every so often I read people saying that it's all a thing of the past and you can't paint proper landscape anymore. And obviously Fiona's work shows that's not at all the case. And I like the way you've got deep and persistent study of the landscape and the working outdoors, but also the sense of the mystery of it and the meaning of it and the poetry of it. And I would also encourage you to listen to the film, the recording, where Fiona's poem is read out in 3 different languages corresponding to the 3 landscapes. So it's Scots, and by native speakers too, by Scots Gaelic, Gallego and Icelandic. And see if you can tell in the rhythms and sounds of the words a correspondence with what she has seen in the landscape. And finally, they are very conscious of environmental change and climate change and the dangers to the environment and so on. It's not like a lot of contemporary work on landscape, which can be rather depressing and gloomy. So it doesn't preach to us, you're not telling us what to think, and you're not telling us that we're all doomed, I don't think. On the contrary, the work is inspiring and uplifting, and I'm very grateful for that. Thank you.
So, hello, I'm Nicola, for anyone who doesn't know me, and I really could echo everything that Christiana says, but also picking up what Simon said about the fact that we're always learning. I'm an art historian, I specialise in historic British art, and so I just wanted to share some of the things that I've learned through watching Fiona at work, through having conversations with her about her process, and how actually that's informed quite extensively and quite profoundly my understanding of historic materials and techniques. I've always been super interested in how artists actually make their works. I think we'd all like to be artists, really, wouldn't we? There's a part of all of us that's absolutely fascinated by literally how do they do it. And what really appealed to me, of course, about Fiona's whole project was this insane journey that you went on to create your own paints. And of course that automatically puts you in dialogue with the artists of the past who would have had, that experience of taking raw ingredients, animal, vegetable or mineral, grinding them down and making some kind of colorant from them. And that process becomes more sophisticated. And the area that I tend to deal with is what's known as the golden age of British watercolour, where you could buy ready-made pigments, but artists would have been individually grinding them and then adding things to them in order to counteract the inconsistencies in the paint, because it wasn't mass manufactured in the way that it is now. So you would get one colour from a particular colour in London, and then it would turn out quite differently if you sourced it from somewhere else. So I've always sort of described it as a kind of a cooking element where artists will add all sorts of other exciting ingredients. Gin was a favourite to speed up the drying time, or gum arabic. Of course, that's the binder in watercolour, but also you can use it to do other things with the paint. It's lovely stuff. It kind of slows it down, or you can use it as a varnish, or you can use it as a stopping out fluid. And we have accounts of artists making colours, scraping off bits of burnt breakfast brioche and mixing that up, because that works quite well. And so what Fiona set out to do just immediately appealed to me as someone who, thinks, wow, this is a real connection with materials which perhaps artists have to some extent lost because they're using mass-produced, commercialised pigments. And I'm sure Christiana feels the same. It was absolutely wonderful, wasn't it, going to visit Fiona in her studio, and she actually, pulls out a bit of rock and says, well, this is what makes this colour. Of course it is, Fiona. Can you show us how that works, please? And so she did, and she got out the Muller and ground it up for us there, and then said, do you want to have a go? Yes, please, I really, really do. And so she showed us this figure of 8, gesture that you have to do. And then she said, you listen out for the song of the pigment, and when that sound changes, you know that you've turned it from stone or, oxide into paint. Yeah. And, again, I've always sort of thought of this as being, quite an exciting process, but Fiona's used the word alchemy, really just opened up a window to what that is. It's much more than just, the practicalities of putting A with B. It's really about connecting very, very fundamentally with what you would like that pigment to do, what you're trying to express, what you're trying to say. And it became clear to me that becomes a sort of part of the meditative process, part of the way that you think about your memories of that place, as well as just being, the sheer determination of this lady to come up with an entire palette sourced from scrabbling over slag heaps and going home with carrier bags full of clay. And I love the fact that in the exhibition, Simon's included these vitrines with the pigments, some of them ready mixed, some of the palettes, some of the tools there, because you can really see those physical properties, the way that some of them sparkle. I mean, it's just so exciting. The paint comes alive. It's got this life and soul, which, of course, you're allowed to sing in your work, and you're working with the medium in ways which are just so sympathetic and sensitive. And, that just becomes a metaphor for the way that we all, need to tread lightly on this planet. So, yeah, thank you. It's just been the greatest privilege and pleasure to learn from you.
It's a privilege for me, working with both of you, honestly. I'd like to thank the Steve Russell studio, who were here. We've got Steve at the end and Tom. They've photographed all the artworks for the book, absolutely stunningly, and they've made one of the films that are playing in the exhibition. So have a good look at the film, because it's really beautiful.
Has anyone got any burning questions for Fiona? We're spellbound.
Let me just say that I enjoyed seeing the work for the first time, face to face, immensely. And it seems that we have these incredible elements in Fiona's work, both, the element of being rooted in tradition, but also an incredible amount of innovation. And in this light, I would like to ask a question about the 2 works that I like the most in the show. They are hanging on both sides of a massive fireplace. They are on the more abstract side, very multi-layered, with different pigments, maybe elements of collage. There is a silver leaf embedded in there, and I just find them immensely captivating. They're so complex, and they're so modern. And so maybe you could share a few words about how they came about. It's Iceland, isn't it?
Yeah, it's Iceland. They're more experimental works. Coming back to the number 3, there is a bit of a 3-step process where I go out and I go out on location, and I do lots of sort of sketching. I also do big drawings actually. So I take huge big drawing boards and do more detailed drawings, and then I come back to the studio and I develop work in the studio. So that's for me an opportunity to sort of push into more experimental works like that. So with that, I was cutting up. What I did was I cut up an old bit of canvas, and I applied silver leaf to it, and then I cut the shapes, and I stuck them onto big sheets of paper. That was on top of pigments. So I painted first with pigments, varying types of pigments, like Vivian Light, for example, and various oxides. And so, because the silver leaf is on the canvas, it's stuck down, and then it sort of looks slightly 3-dimensional, which I thought was really interesting. So it's sort of capturing the idea of glacial rivers, rivulets, but you can also start to see mystical creatures like Fiat Kona, who's the sort of the woman that lives in the waters in Iceland.
Thank you so much. And maybe perhaps I could draw your attention, ladies, to another incredibly interesting element in the show, which is that big glass box with all sorts of preparatory drawings, the sketchbooks. I really would love to see a little bit more of that, because this is probably the treasure trove.
Yes, so yeah, sketchbooks, developing sketches, some drawn outside, some I play around with in the studio. And that's how I evolve ideas. It's very important to do that.
I liked what you said actually, Christiana, about the outdoor tradition, artists painting outside, and the fact that this is not a new practice. Artists have been doing it for centuries, but at no point does it ever become stale or old or tired, because you're in different landscapes, different artists, different times, and it's that sheer physical excitement and the profound feelings of that particular moment. I was talking to another artist, an elderly artist who lives on the Essex coast, and he paints the sky from his lounge every day. I said, "You paint every day?" He's in his 90s. And he says, "Yes, it's a miracle. It would be a crime not to." And I mean, it's that, it just is, when you have an artist who, like you are, is able to connect and then communicate those things, that's never going to not be exciting. And, it's a gift for all of us to have our eyes open to nature in that way.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I mean, I think getting outside is really, really important, because it's not just the looking, it's also all the other stuff that happens. I mean, it's the sounds, it's the temperature, it's the weather that keeps changing. It might be raining slightly, or it might be hailing, or starting to snow, as in Iceland. I mean, all of those different landscapes were not necessarily easy, because they were all connected by the North Atlantic. But nevertheless, unless it's absolutely impossible, I carry on. But that sort of feeds into the work. I know artists like Kurt Jackson, for example. He makes his work like that outside on a massive scale, doesn't he? And then everything, the landscape literally physically go into his work. It's the same sort of idea. It makes you feel more alive. That's why I do it. It makes me feel alive and connected. And I think, I think that's becoming even more important in today's world.
I'm glad you enjoyed seeing the sketchbooks. Every artist we work with, we plead, can we see your sketchbooks? And for some, it's the equivalent of their private diary, I think. And they find it very hard to share. But when we're able, and we're very grateful for Fiona sharing them with us, because it's part of the journey, as you say. And unless my ears were playing a trick, I think Fiona said, I just stuck a piece of paper.
Yes.
And I think we have to agree there's nothing just about what Fiona has done in the exhibition. It shows wonderfully how at ease you are with what you're doing, I think, to be able to say it's just. But we recognise it, as Christiana and Nicola have said, that it's not a just exhibition. This is something special. So what we've arranged, if you would like to go and see the pictures again, all the lights are still on. If you'd like to see the book and get Nicola and Christiana, and more importantly, I hope you don't mind saying, Fiona signing the book as well, that would be great. If you'd like to do that, just come on over. If you need to go, you can just go through the side gate out to the car park. Is that okay? Can we give them another round of applause?